I would like to welcome you to the Canada Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder Research Network's webinar. It's on building stability, innovative housing strategies for individuals with FASD. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm just going to give a minute or two, which we've already done, to welcome everybody and again, to encourage individuals to put which treaty territory that you're from and what location that you're joining us from. My name is Alicia Munn, and I'm an adoptive mom and biomom, advocate, public speaker from Fredericton, New Brunswick. I have a background in nursing, persons with complex needs. I run a support group for families impacted by FASD in the province of New Brunswick, and I am the New Brunswick representative for the Family Advisory Committee for CanFASD. From CanFASD, we would like to acknowledge the important steps in reconciliation in the acknowledgement of the traditional lands and treaty lands and recognition for the people of the territory. The Canadian FASD Research Network recognizes the historical significance and contributions of the Indigenous peoples and their cultures and understand the important role that Indigenous community plays in today's society and the future. We acknowledge that we live on, work, meet on the traditional territories across Canada and many of the First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. I would also like to acknowledge that I am on the land in which we gather in New Brunswick on the traditional unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Maliseet people, Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy. So today we're really excited to welcome Celise Bibar and Joseph Munn. Celise is a part-time research assistant with CanFASD and a part-time PhD student at Laurentian University. Celise completed her Master's of Arts in Interdisciplinary Health and in 2018 studied the knowledge of FASD in medical students. Her PhD work explores awareness and prevention of FASD in Northern Ontario and involving in the creation of the model that what defines the effectiveness and means to FASD prevention campaigns. Celise brings previous work from CanFASD on the Choose Housing project that we will be currently assisting with the National FASD database and alongside any other activities that she can help with. I had the privilege of meeting Celise in Saskatchewan, and her knowledge is beyond amazing in her research work. Joseph is a 23-year-old male from New Brunswick. He is on the AFECT committee with CanFASD. Receiving a diagnosis at the age of 18, he provided strength, adaptability, and resilience of his character. Like many, he has struggled with the professional support and resources. Leaning on his strengths and his friends and family, he has been able to sustain consistent full-time employment, secure housing, interdependent living, while achieving many of life's milestones. He has 2 cats that are his babies, and he enjoys playing virtual reality games, watching anime, hanging out with friends and family when he isn't working. So first, I'd like to bring Celise to the audience, and she's going to give a presentation of her knowledge and research.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Alicia. Yeah, like she said, I'm Celise Bieber, no relation to Justin. I'm going to share my slides here. Please let me know if you can see everything okay. Let me know if anything glitches out. I'm happy to stop at any point. But yeah, I'm going to be updating you on the CanFASD housing project, which is called Choose Co-Creating Housing Solutions, Enacting Opportunities for Individuals with Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. You can see why we abbreviated it. It's a bit of a mouthful. I presented this at Saskatoon as well. So this presentation will be focusing less so on the actual results and more so on what we're doing with them. But if you have any questions about the actual results themselves, I'm happy to answer them. But first, I'd like to begin with gratitude for the land that I come from and that I'm currently on. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and Between the Lakes Purchase, traditional lands of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And I'd also like to begin with gratitude for those that guided this research, the whole research team and all of our participants, those individuals with FASD, the caregivers, policymakers, and service providers who gave a whole lot of their time. We couldn't have done this project without them. And then just a little bit of background. I really don't need to go into too much about this, I don't think, because a simple Google search about housing in Canada hits you with headlines like these. Is Canada's housing crisis about to take a very dark turn? More Canadians giving up on owning a home. Lots about the housing crisis, lots about homelessness. And in summary, the landscape of housing when it comes to FASD is very limited, expensive, and not FASD informed. But this project is building on the person-centered framework for housing individuals with FASD that was done by Dr. Jackie Pai and her team in 2018. And I'll hit you with some highlights, three main points that we are kind of building off of. The first is that housing is a point of connection, the intersection between the individuals and their surrounding systems, and therefore housing cannot be treated as separate from those other domains of life. They're intrinsically interlinked. The second is that individuals have unique experiences of housing and being unhoused, and that care needs to stem from the individual outwards. So that relational person-centered approach is key. And then the third point from the framework is that at the heart of person-centered approaches is understanding. Fostering understanding of an individual translates into better support of their needs and their wants and their goals. And similarly, understanding the individual will enable services to build connections between the domain of housing and other intersecting domains of life. So our project, we interviewed 47 participants. We had 11 individuals with FASD, 17 caregivers, 17 service providers, and 7 policymakers. And if that math doesn't seem like it adds up, it's because it doesn't. We had multiple participants that were in differing categories at the same time. So we had one individual who was both a caregiver and an individual with FASD. And we had 5 individuals who were both caregivers and service providers. When it comes to where we got participants across Canada, most of our participants came from Ontario and Alberta, but we did have some from Saskatchewan, British Columbia, the Yukon Territories, New Brunswick, Manitoba, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And then going into a little bit more about the results themselves. So we had several domains that kind of summarized what our participants talked about. The first was access. The second was individualization. The third was collaboration. And all of those really came under the head of the fourth, which was understanding. So briefly, talking about access, our participants talked about having flexible access to supports and resources and housing options as key. They talked about how supports, housing, and policy should be fluid and able to adapt to the individual and not expect the other way around. And they also talked about how since there's no one size fits all solution to housing, there's really no one person fits all solution to housing as well. And supporting housing is a team effort. But there's also this domain of understanding that was really underlied everything. And in summary, when it came to that understanding, our participants really discussed it as the fundamental foundation on which everything else could be built. And it also enabled those other 3 domains. So access, it enabled access through being able to find appropriate supports and housing from knowing what would be beneficial. And it also enabled access through promoting open discussion of FASD in the support and housing search. Understanding enabled collaboration through enhancing communication and trust. Our participant talked about how it enabled collaboration through being able to identify gaps in your own knowledge and therefore knowing when you should reach out for help. And it also enabled individualization by being able to develop those appropriate and relevant supports and resources once you have that understanding. And it also enabled individualization through knowing that understanding the disorder of FASD is important, yes, but that understanding the individual as a person is essential. So now that I've very quickly run you through all of those pieces, here are some of the resources currently that we have in development based on what we found. So we have 4 of them. The first are FASD informed tables, and many of these are aimed towards service providers and helping them build that understanding. So these FASD informed tables are used to help with identifying, checking, and rechecking goals that individuals with FASD have. We have need navigational tables, which are used to identify areas of support and need that those individuals might like to focus on. We have an accommodation checklist for housing, which is used to identify possible opportunities for accommodation alongside different ideas as to how that could come about. And we have a person-centered process, which is used as a more general path to ongoing care with the tenant. And I'll go through all of these in a little bit more detail, starting with those FASD informed tables. So these tables aim to help service providers understand FASD as a full body disorder. So how their body might be affected by different ways they can complete tasks or their unique brain development, how their thinking might be affected in their communication, their academic skills, cognition, memory, attention, and how their well-being might also be affected with substance use, emotional regulation, behavior and impulse control, social aspects, and their other adaptive skills. So the idea is that these FASD informed tables would be referred to throughout all stages of the housing journey, and that listening and asking relevant questions is at the heart of developing understanding. So these tables aim to be a tool to help that process, helping service providers to understand the effects that FASD may have on their tenants' body, thinking, and well-being. So as an example, to give you some ways that a tenant's thinking might be affected, there'd be, when it comes to attention, there'd be a section on what they might see. So things like forgetting the bus route despite being shown twice that week, or only partially completing instructions that they were given, or being frequently distracted when they should be working. So they might see some of these behaviors and identify them, and then take a step back and say, okay, why am I seeing this? Perhaps it's due to how FASD is interacting with that individual. Maybe it's the attentional symptoms that impact their ability to sustain attention, attend to important information, all these different pieces. And then from there, they can think, okay, what might I ask or do? So as an example, completing tasks together while the individual is learning. And then once the activity has become habitual, sorry if you hear my dogs barking. Once the activity has become habitual, then you can move forward without having to complete those tasks together. So this is just an example, but the idea would be that they would be flexible and able to work through with that service provider, with that individual, and what they might see would be very specific to that person, right? So then we have these need navigational tables. These tables encompass three types of individual needs. They have basic needs, psychological needs, and self-fulfillment needs. And each table is dedicated to a different area of need and takes the perspective from either the tenant or the staff. So as an example, I know there's a lot of text on your screen right now. It would kind of work something like this. So taking a psychological need, say that the tenant that you're working with wants to focus on their relationships. They want to expand their support network, and they want to increase those feelings of belongingness and love. So the first step is to figure out why they want to focus on this need. And then let's figure out how they can do so. So for example, making connections through telling my worker about any relationships I have or would like to have, and what is important to me in a relationship. From there, we take the perspective of the housing provider, and they take a step back and think, okay, so what can the program do? So the program can, for example, provide relationally based services like going with tenants and supporting them in establishing new relationships and building and maintaining those relationships with landlords, as another example. And then a very key aspect, though, is to actually see if those steps are helping. So by maybe identifying connections made and relationships maintained, by mapping out support networks or asking tenants how they feel about their connections, or using some scales that check for feelings of love and belonging, all of those types of things. So these need navigational tables have those listed action items. They're not exhaustive. They're really meant to be a starting point for that collaborative process of creating or checking in on those goals. And those goals that are created using these tables should be broken down into meaningful, concrete, and achievable steps, and they should be reviewed regularly, and successes should be celebrated. So then the third one is the FASD accommodation checklist for housing. So the idea is that individuals with FASD are unique, and their accommodations should be unique to them too. We talk about a checklist because it's not, you don't check every box for every single person. So the context of this checklist are a mix of the Choose project results, the Creating Intersections Person-Centered Framework that was developed in 2018 by Dr. Pai and her team, and other literature around disability and accommodation. And there's 10 categories of assessment of need, along with examples of what could be asked to check that need and ideas as to how that need could be accommodated. So things like managing money, do you need help with understanding the terms of your lease or complying with the terms of your lease? General housekeeping, physical layout of your house, household equipment and safety, travel skills, support need awareness, all of those different pieces, and identifying where accommodations could be made for what that individual needs. So for example, say we're thinking about household equipment and safety when it comes to cooking. Maybe a tenant identifies that they tend to forget when the oven is on, or they need help with fire safety, those types of things. So then we have some example questions that could be asked, like, do you like to cook a lot? Would you like to learn? Is this something you'd like to focus on? Or how comfortable are you cooking for yourself? And do you have someone to help you? And then we'd have lots of space for notes, of course, and then some ideas for accommodation. And there's a lot more than this, but I've made it a little easier to read with just a couple points. So things like using an electric range as opposed to a gas range, or having an automatic interlock that starts the range exhaust as soon as you turn it on, having a magnetic fire extinguisher, or just including a toaster oven or speed cook microwave as opposed to a range at all. And we've also developed an accommodations checklist for individuals with FASD that they can kind of go through in a more interactive way. It's kind of like a point and click game. At least that's how I like to think about it. So the idea is what would you like to help with first? So let's say I want help with moving in. So I'd click on this dot and it would go to the next piece of it. So it's all built out like that. And it's just a different way of laying out the same information. And then lastly, that resource we have is the person-centered process, where we talk about how the process of housing, it's not always linear, but it really often encounters similar successes and setbacks. So this process pathway has been developed in order to assist in the recommendations of ongoing tenant engagement and reevaluation of their individual needs and the service provision. So we have the who piece, the where piece, the how piece, and the what piece. And the idea is, if I take the example of the who piece, when someone comes and needs help with housing or is in your housing, however your service provision goes, that you will always need to build that understanding. That stays consistent between tenant to tenant. So it's worth establishing, okay, how are we going to build that understanding? What are the pieces that make up a full understanding of a person? Do you need to know their strengths? Do you need to know their needs? Do you need to know their goals? What does their support system looks like? Who needs to be at the table for them versus who can be at the table for them, and what housing supports would they benefit from versus what are necessary, thinking about all those different types of pieces. And then also, of course, maintaining that understanding while it's been built. So making sure that you have a plan as to how that understanding can be maintained, when that understanding is rechecked throughout the process, of figuring out when their goals were last identified and are they still relevant? Did they complete those goals? Were they celebrated? And based on what you know, what is their possible housing trajectory? What has changed? What influenced it? All those pieces to kind of keep that understanding going. So those are the different resources. But we also have a kind of more practical action research pilot project. It's very much a project in its preparation stage. So there's two different pieces to this project. The first is becoming FASD informed, a research project. So the idea of this research project would be to explore what training and practices translates into understanding and action. And then we would adapt, update, and implement either existing training or develop new with different housing service providers. And by doing so, we could collect evidence on what being FASD informed means and what it can mean for everyone else. So that would be so that we could then report and say, okay, here is how you become FASD informed, and here's the actual impact that it could have. That would be the idea in that sense. And then the second part of the Action Research Pilot Project would be making connections, a community of practice. So the idea behind this would be bringing housing providers together no matter their level of FASD experience. and collaborating and teaching each other. Because one of the main findings, at least I was struck by when I was doing the interviews, was that great work was really being done all over Canada, but it was being done often in isolation. Folks had kind of built themselves and their FASD knowledge and structures and supports from the ground up. So I think that really great work could be done if we were working together. And the idea behind this would be building relationships and research and resources and a new way forward together. So we currently actually have 6 partner organizations who are interested and on board for this type of project, but it does need more resources and perhaps some more funding. So we're seeking ways that we can implement this as we go. So, in summary, I feel like I've talked very fast, but the Choose project was a success in updating what we already know and pointing us to new paths forward. While the larger project portions of our plans are dependent on funding, we are focused on adapting our findings into usable tools, those resources that I showed you, that can be used by those that support individuals with FASD. And although this piece of Choose is coming to a close, housing is very much a persistent problem for individuals with FASD in Canada, and CanFAS will be continuing to extend Choose's project work in however we can in maintaining our work in the housing space. So please stay tuned. And that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Celise. I have a whole bunch of words, but I'm going to cut it down to a few. Wow, thank you, and this is greatly needed. And I'm sure that a lot of people can attest to that on this call as well. This would have been so much more helpful had we had access to it years ago, but I can definitely see a lot of value in this. So I do thank you for that. Up
Thank you.
next, we have Joseph and I, and we will be doing a little bit of talk about his journey with the lived person-centered approach and the supports and challenges he's faced along the way. And we'll show you a short video at the end of a tour of his house and the accommodations that we've had to help set him up. Joseph's actually my third person that I've had put into housing. And all 3 of them have had different levels of housing. One went into an apartment, one went into individual living, and one went into supportive assistive living with 24-hour support. So I'm going to give the podium to Joseph and let him share his experiences and stories next.
Hey, I'm Joseph. I'm from New Brunswick, Canada. And well, back in 2019, we bought my house. It's just a little tiny mobile home, technically called a trailer home, but it was fun to try to figure out what works for me, what doesn't work for me. So it's been a bumpy road. We can just ask Alicia about that one. One thing I've noticed that does help me is noting everything, like putting labels. And Alicia.
Yep.
I was gonna say it. There's been a lot of times I've relied on Alicia because there's been times where everything gets overwhelming and it's just everything sensors overload. So there's been times like last week I had to call in Alicia.
And Joseph, how do you feel now having your own home? Like, did you ever think that you could have your own home? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Uh, it was Frank. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
In all honesty, no, I didn't think I'd be able to live individually. So it was an adjustment to try to learn the ropes of individual living. Right now, I do have a roommate, kind of not helping, but
And what have you learned about yourself through this experience?
that I need to start setting boundaries because people will take advantage of the fact that I can barely say no, which is, I hate to say, a common factor with people with our disability.
And do you like having your own place?
Oh, yes, I definitely do. It's more of a freedom that I have the luxury to own my own house.
And was it something that we just bought the house and you just moved into, or was there prep work that we did before?
It took, well, I bought the house back in 2019 and I moved in late 2020. So it took about a year and a half to actually finish the construction and to label everything and get a system in place. I have an Integrity Home Health Network that comes in weekly from Monday to Friday for about 2 hours. So they help me with the basic needs of like cleaning up, reminding me to take my medication because one, I don't remember. Another common thing is forgetting to eat, is I can go days without eating without having the hunger sensation. And they'll come in, remind me to eat and stuff.
And do you find that helpful?
Yes, yes, I do. Sorry, I was just reading the Q&A.
That's okay. And how do you manage your finances and working full time and your social life and your cats and keep up your
Well,
house?
I don't want to butcher this person's name, but Wela. In all honesty, it's hard to determine when roommates are appropriate. Because for me, I took my roommate in on a whim because I felt bad for his situation. And in all honesty, it's really screwed my whole system over because I'm forking over too much money and it's just being fun. Now, what was the question you asked, Alicia?
How do you manage to pay your bills and keep your house and take care of everything?
One thing I do try to keep track of is on the phone. I also have Google systems that remind me when bills are coming out. I also have a thing on the back of that door that has a full chart where I can just put the bills that are upcoming in and then move the bills that are paid over.
And instead of using like sticky notes and things like that in your house, oftentimes I receive messages that sometimes they're just random letters, sometimes they're random numbers, sometimes they're screenshots. What benefit does that do for you by you sending me those things?
Because one thing with me personally, if I have just a random number, I can associate that with like a word just because I've been going through cadet program for a while, so I understand like the old systems and stuff. And that's just been habit that I carried over.
And Joseph, there is a question here that says, do you have a chart that reminds you what you need to do from the start of your day to the end of your day?
Yes, I did. It was sitting right up top of that photo, but unfortunately it did fall and shattered, so I have to get a new one made.
And what do you find about picture cues? Do you find that they're helpful, or do you find that they're helpful all the time, once in a while? Can you tell us about that?
So the picture cues are good and all, but there'll be a time where just basically take that photo, it becomes stagnant, so you just end up walking by it each day, not even looking at it. So what I find happens is even if I move the photo like over onto the door, I will acknowledge it, and then the next week I'll move it back to that spot. So just the constant moving causes me to actually focus on the photo.
Is there anything else, Joseph, that you would like to add about your experience with housing?
One thing is obviously have good people that you can rely on if you're, especially if you're going to be renting out your spare bedroom, which was beneficial for the first person, but was not beneficial for the second. I find it's obviously a hit and miss if it's going to be beneficial or not. It depends on if they're pulling their weight and not creating as much chaos in your own home.
Thank you for that, Joseph. And I'm just going to elaborate a little bit. Joseph is my son, and I did help him create this housing project. He had expressed to me when he was younger that he wanted to live independently. We didn't know what that was going to be like. So we tried a pilot program that I looked online and on Kijiji, and somebody was looking for a house sitter, but they had to pay for the utilities. So they got to stay in the house for free, and they had to pay for their utilities. So that it was just down the road from my house. we had it set up that if Joseph couldn't manage that that responsibility, then we had enough capacity to be able to manage the responsibility in a limited way. So that was a key indicator for us of his abilities, his strengths, his challenges, his weaknesses. We noticed things like yard work and upkeep was challenging for him. So when he moved into this house, we determined that he needed to have someone hired, but he still had the ability to do his own yard work if needed. So he still had a lawnmower, he had a shovel and stuff like that. We know that there's multiple health issues that can come collaboratively with FASD. So sometimes his body and brain don't feel well. So that inhibits him from not being able to always take care of that need. So we prevented and we prepared for that when he moved into his own place. We had an occupational therapist come in and they did an OT assessment of how to set up his house. And that was helpful to an extent. Unfortunately, at that time, they were not FASD informed. They have now since become FASD informed, which is really exciting. But we learned a lot through that process. So we learned that Joseph doesn't acknowledge or take things into consideration if it's below the waist in his home. So anything of importance, like his food or dishes that he uses every day, cleaning products, towels, anything like that, we actually keep from his waist up. We know that closets become a great abyss of clutter and chaos. So we didn't put any closets in his house. All of his important stuff was from the waist up, but we also labeled everything. And when his brain does become tired, or he struggles with executive function, then he just looks at the pictures or looks at the labels and they help cue him. But what he's also found, and he's expressed to me, is when he has home care come in or he has a friend come in, then they're not putting his stuff in random spots all the time. We still notice that they do put things where they feel that things should go. We actually found a lot of his personal hand towels that he would use in the bathroom in his um, kitchen drawer with that he would wash his dishes and dry his dishes with. So things like that were very helpful. So that way there, if he is looking for something that's important to him, he can access it because they know where to put the stuff away. His pots and pans are on a hook. We're going to show you a video of his home very shortly. And he does have smart technology that is a strength for him. So he's actually set that up. He sets alarms on his phone as he's identified, and sometimes he has 115 alarms on his phone, but that's what works for him. The location that he moved in, we made sure that we met with the landlord first because it is leased land, but he owns his own place. It should have been condemned when he did get it. When a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into the house, but we created an FASD house. We literally took the whole place apart and rebuilt it from the frame up. And it is a home for him. He picked out the colors, he picked out the patterns for the flooring. We had access to building materials and resources. It took a community. We had in the support group that I run, there was 4 other adults with FASD that actually came and helped with the building and the setup of his home, and with the demolition of his home. We have family members. One actually has suspected FASD, and he did a lot of the construction work to the home, and we're very grateful for those resources. And it does take a community. It takes a village to raise these children and to raise these adults to help them support to the best of their ability. We thought it was important that his neighbors really knew who he was. So we made it a point to introduce him to his neighbors so that he could see the person and know that they are an individual and that there needs to be a level of respect. We talked to him about smoking and using cannabis or alcohol in his home and how that can depreciate a value of a home and what it can do. And we also talked about the health components of that. So if anybody does smoke, they actually are very respectful for him and they smoke outside, vape outside, cannabis use is used outside. Joseph and I have created an excellent relationship on trust and respect. So Joseph knows at the end of the day, if I'm being hard to get along with, if I am not always easy to approach, that I have his back, that he can trust me, and that I will do anything and everything to make sure his best interest is at heart. And when he had this individual move in, he confabulated a little bit, didn't you, Joseph? Yes, I'm doing fine. Yep, I'm good. Everything's great. But then we learned that, he had to use the food bank, which is fine, but it was a service that he accessed on his own. He had to take his internet resources, and he had to disconnect from one service provider and reactivate with another service provider because it was too expensive for him. And these are all initiatives that he's taken on his own that I've later since found out, but he did that. And he knows that he's supported. So if there's any challenge, he will eventually reach out. Sometimes he needs to do it on his own and to figure that out. But, that's the way it goes. It's trial and error, it's adapting, it's configuring, reconfiguring. And we tried to do a lot of things. We learned that he had heightened sensory needs and sensory output. So when we bought his towels and his face cloths and the paint on the walls and if we'd used a glossy finish versus a flat finish, all of those were his input. So this is a house that's essentially built for him. And it has been challenging to get help and support. Joseph has a disability support plan through our social services department, and he did qualify for 20 hours a week. That started out at 5 hours, and then we had to increase based on his needs. Unfortunately, there was a lot of ignorance and understanding of FASD and his needs. They said to me that he just needed life skills training and courses, and he would be fine to manage the house on his own. Living with him and being his mom, I knew that that wasn't the case, that, there would be a lot of frequent follow-ups, meetings. We would go to his place for supper, to make sure to check in and see how things were going. We would just do random pop-ins and visits. There were sometimes that he was actually really nervous because he didn't want to disappoint us, but he was struggling to manage his place. So we let him know that what our level of success is the fact that he's happy. And that was kind of a huge barrier for him, is disappointing us. So we've worked through that. Is there any other questions?
Also, with the home support workers, it's been a challenge to try and keep them because most of them don't really understand what FASD is, and then I end up just going through a whole bunch because what am I on, like 31 now?
21.
21. 10 off.
And we go through these support workers for a variety of reasons. His last one that worked really, really well, there was an immigration situation, so he lost them due to immigration. Some have left because of his attitude and his personality, because they don't understand his sarcasm, or they think that he's being defiant and argumentative when he's really not. He's just literally answering their question as they ask him. He's had individuals that they feel that he's more capable than they are, and they shouldn't have to be there. There's been a variety of reasons. Some have been more interested in their social life and their social media, so that hasn't been helpful. So there's always a variety, but again, it's just the adapting and involving the community support. And we do know that when Joseph's house is organized, his brain flow flows better, but we also set his house up the way his brain flow works. So when we set his kitchen up and when we set his bathroom up and all of that for his activities of daily living, we did it in an organic fashion. So I had actually asked him, Joseph, if you were going to make a pot of spaghetti, how would you make it? Where would you go to get your pot? So we went with his automatic response of where he thinks that it should be. And that's actually worked quite well for us. I'm not sure if that's something that would work for everybody, but knowing where his natural response was going to go helped with a lot of that creation for where to put things. So if there's no more questions, if we want to play the video of Joseph's house so that you guys can kind of see his home and all the hard work that he's done. And he's been able to upkeep it for almost 4 years now, and we're very, very proud of him.
We are at the property of Joseph Munn, an adult with FASD. He's going to take us on a tour of his home today.
Hello, welcome to my humble abode. You can come on in. So, I'm Joseph Munn. I am currently 22 years old. This is my house. I've been living here since 2020. So yeah, I'm going to give you guys a tour of my house. And yeah. So yeah, we're going to give you guys a tour of my house. Currently, I have the Google Home system, which will tell me if my door is open, if I forgot the lights, it'll turn it off after I leave, and it'll just say voice commands to turn off the TV, turn off my radio, turn off that. I also leave stuff out in the open so I can try to keep things organized so I know where it goes. Yeah, this is my living room also, but for bills I have them all sitting right here so I can remember to pay my power bill, electricity, and all that stuff is sitting usually right there.
So Joseph, how do you remember to pay your bills?
My Google Home will remind me, and it will also send a notification to my phone and on my computer.
And what's this over here?
That is just a day-to-day, so if I have cleaning on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, so garbage days are usually Friday, so it just gives me an idea of what I should have done each day. With the Home Support Week people that come in for 2 hours from Monday to Friday. They help me clean and do a bunch of stuff. This is my kitchen. I have everything that is important usually sitting up top. I also have things labeled out, so if people are putting stuff away, we have the mugs, the cups. Same thing with over here, we have the bowls. And don't mind me, I'm just making up some popcorn right now. I also have my silverware drawer. And yes, I do have a dishwasher. That is not used every day because one thing, I'll only use a couple of dishes in 2 days. So if it's sitting there, it'll create mold, mildew, and then it'll just reek it up and I'll forget about it. So yeah, this is my kitchen. My bathroom, which is right on over here. So everything that is important is sitting out again. So I know where it goes, like the towels. It's also labeled up top. We have all the face cloths and stuff. Anything that is used daily, I usually put right here, especially during the winter time. So this is my shower. It's one of the special type showers. It has a seat here, so if my leg is acting up, I can sit down. And I can still also wash my body with the extended one. To your right is my medicine cabinet and all the stuff for when I'm overwhelmed. It has the, yeah, everything goes right here. And for the bedroom. This is my bedroom. For me, I don't use dressers or stuff because if it's in a drawer, I'm not going to remember it or it's just going to be a clutter all. I have everything out, like my shirts, my pants, my socks, and my underwear. But I'm not going to show you that, because that's mine. I also have all my stuff exposed, so dress shirts are all here, sweaters, jackets are all in the back. All my suitcases and stuff that I need to travel and extra blankets are sitting right here. I also have everything neatly. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Joseph, for showing us your home and how things are for you on a day-to-day. And I hope you all the best and continued success with this. It looks like a fantastic home, very comforting. And thank you for sharing how an individual with FASD can be successful.
So I'd like to say a big thank you to our presenters today. Thank you, Joseph Munn and Celeste Bieber. I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining us today and hope that in the future you will join us with future webinars. Get more information on CanFASD and stay in the know. With respect for all the upcoming webinars, please check out our website at www.canfasd.ca or follow us on social media channels to find out our resources. Thank you and have a great day.